Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Could the sight of a cross traumatize somebody so badly that his life is just shattered? Well, that's what one atheist is claiming. And what is this cross? It's a 100-year-old memorial for those who have died in our various wars. Terry?
Well, the Supreme Court is going to hear arguments about that case today. And as Paul Strand tells us, it's not just one memorial that's at risk. The court's decision could shape the future of religious freedom in America.
Moms of 49 Bladensburg area soldiers killed in World War I designed the Peace Cross in memory of their sons. Here, 100 years later, the legal team defending the cross, which is now on public land, believe this could be the most crucial religious liberty case the Supreme Court handles this term. It could put an end to judges and bureaucrats deciding if a religious symbol or display is too religious or secular enough.
This area of the law is just leading to absurd results. It's leading to city councilmen having to go out there with rulers to make sure that they have enough reindeer around a nativity scene to make sure that it is secular enough of a display.
Jeremy Dice's team hopes the court agrees if a symbol or display doesn't force people to accept religion, it isn't too religious.
A passive monument isn't forcing you to do anything. This monument in particular is just there to remember 49 men who died defending our freedom.
Maryland's governor took to Facebook to defend it.
This monument was never meant to be a religious object. It was to honor our veterans, which we're going to fight to protect.
But a team of atheists, humanists, and secularists object that the Peace Cross is on government land and maintained by the state.
That the government on this piece of property is favoring a religion with this huge symbol, that when you come across the bridge or approach it from any of the highways, you see nothing but this huge Christian cross.
Renee Green talked to Lowe and other opponents of the cross for her documentary, Save the Peace Cross.
It gives the impression of Christianity and nothing else, and it gives the impression of government endorsement of Christianity.
In the suit against the cross, one atheist said he was traumatized driving by it. Green appears in her documentary to point out that many telephone poles are in the shape of a cross.
If the plaintiffs win this lawsuit, will all the telephone poles need to be modified? I just hope that they are not traumatized by telephone poles while driving.
But all humor aside, this case has serious implications. Symbols like the Ten Commandments and Nativity have both won and lost in various courts. Now one of the world's most beloved symbols, the cross, is on the line.
The Supreme Court of the United States is the last best hope for this memorial.
Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Bladensburg, Maryland.
You know, there's nothing in our Constitution that talks about separation of church and state. It is not in the Constitution of the United States. And what it says in the Bill of Rights is that government shall not establish a church like they had in Virginia when my ancestors were growing up. And as Protestants, they were persecuted by the Church of England. And there's nothing that the government, the federal government, can establish a religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof. That's it. But we have had court decisions, one of which was put down by a former member of the Ku Klux Klan who was sitting on the Supreme Court. He was a virulent anti-Catholic. And he talks about separation of church and state and that we're going to build a wall of separation and we will not permit its breach. Well, that is one man's word. It's time now the Supreme Court clarify this nonsense that's been out there. There's nothing in our history that was said by Justice William O. Douglas. We are a religious people whose institutions presuppose the existence of a supreme being. That is in a Supreme Court decision. There's an earlier one that said we are a Christian nation. And our nation was built on the Bible, and it was built on Christianity. And the idea that the government has to be completely neutral is nonsense. But it's been enforced because of extreme antagonism like this atheist. It's time with Justice Gorsuch and the new justices that are on the court, and Justice Roberts and others, they have a clear majority of constitutionalists who should say, let's go back to the meaning of the Constitution and let's do away with these things. There's one called the Lemon Test, and that's the one that didn't advance. And you know, Justice Scalia said it's a ghoul that keeps rising from the grave, and it's time we drive a stake through its heart. Well, it's time they drive some stakes through the hearts of these terrible decisions and clarify once and for all the fact that the observance of religion in our public life is not something that's prohibited in any way by the United States Constitution. It just isn't. Now, down in Venezuela, you know what I was thinking about? I think Maduro is acting so tough. We ought to mass our armed forces outside the border of Venezuela. Some of those helicopter gunships with Hellfire missiles, tanks, troops, and get them all lined up and let those troops inside of Venezuela know what will happen to them if we start rolling across the border. And it's we, but it's all the nations of South America all coming together. But the president of Venezuela has asked for military help because they're now under the grip of a vicious socialist dictator. And Vice President Pence says that military force is an option to removing Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. John Jessup has more on that.
That's right, Pat. Monday, Pence assured Venezuela's interim president nothing is off the table. Still, the administration hopes sanctions will bring a peaceful transition of power. So far, though, efforts to remove Nicolas Maduro have proven useless. And as Heather Sells reports, caught in the middle are the Venezuelan people left to suffer.
Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro is striking back at the U.S. and all efforts to remove him from power. On Monday, he told ABC News the U.S. is getting ready to invade to get him out.
The United States wants Venezuela's oil, and they're willing to go to war for that oil.
The U.S. is downplaying the use of military force. Meeting with foreign leaders and Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido in Colombia, Vice President Pence called for more sanctions and humanitarian aid. Guaido wants assurances the U.S. will use force if necessary. Pence said force is an option, but the U.S. hopes for better.
In the days and weeks ahead, the United States will continue to deliver life-saving food for the hungry, medicine for the desperately ill, and shelter for those displaced. And while we stand with the Venezuelan people, we will also continue to stand up to all of those who would oppress them.
Venezuela's people are desperate. The economy is in shambles and they lack food and medicine. More than 3 million have fled the country. This weekend, forces supporting Maduro fired tear gas and buckshot to keep aid trucks from entering the country.
The world saw within hours on Saturday what Venezuela has lived with for years. The destruction of production, the burning of food, the burning of medicine that could save lives.
The military continues to publicly back Maduro, and so far, no high-level military leaders have defected. CBN's Chuck Holton is just back from the Colombia-Venezuela border. He says the dictator is getting support from the outside.
The populace is so powerless against the Maduro regime because they're being propped up by Russia and by Cuba. Maduro himself is being protected by over 400 Russian mercenaries right now. He doesn't even trust his own military to protect him.
Even the U.S. media seems powerless. Maduro briefly detained Univision anchor Jorge Ramos and confiscated his equipment after an interview because he didn't like the questions. The U.S. has asked the UN Security Council to meet today to discuss Venezuela. Right now, that council is divided, with the U.S. and many Western and Latin American countries backing the opposition, while Russia, China, and others support Maduro. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Thanks, Heather. Pat, back to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations is powerless as long as Russia and China have veto power. And what can they do in the Security Council? There's nothing they can do. And so it's time for the humanitarian people to get together in an alliance with the South American and Central American countries to listen to the plea of the elected president of that country and then send in the necessary forces and knock those Maduro people right out. But what I would say, if we mass those forces outside the border, and they get a little demonstration of what a Hellfire missile is like, what one of those helicopter gunships can do with the guns they have available to them, and what it would be like if our tanks start rolling across the border. Then they begin to see that they themselves are going to be executed, every one of those troops. Then all of a sudden they're going to switch sides and they won't be back in Maduro anymore. But we've got to do that. And I think a show of force without going to war would be a very effective way of doing it. Let those troops say they're not playing games anymore. We're serious. That monster is going to go out, and it's going to happen. And now we turn to what's happening is the president has gone to Hanoi to have his second summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. And while Kim still needs to make major concessions on nuclear weapons, the president believes he can come and build a two-party relationship. Our correspondent Ben Kennedy has that report.
President Trump says he thinks they will have a very good summit, adding that North Korea could become an economic powerhouse if only they would give up their nuclear weapons.
We want denuclearization, and I think he'll have a country that will set a lot of records for speed in terms of an economy.
President Trump took off for his second high-stakes meeting with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un.
We're going to have, I think, a very interesting 2.5 days in Vietnam.
In Hanoi, the two plan to talk about new relations, lasting peace, complete denuclearization, and recovering POW MIA remains. North Korea has not fired a missile or even tested a nuclear weapon since their last meeting more than a year ago.
As long as there's no testing, we're happy.
Critics, however, want some commitment from North Korea to dismantle their nuclear program. U.S. intel officials say that's unlikely.
Leaders ultimately view nuclear weapons as critical to regime survival.
Trump believes that building trust will reduce tension in the region and could even lead to an end to the Korean War. Now, a ceasefire has been in effect since the 50s between North and South Korea. The summit is on Wednesday and Thursday. In the meantime, Trump says the sanctions will remain in place as North Korea has taken pretty much zero concrete steps to dismantle their nuclear program. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Ben. Senate Democrats blocked a vote on a bill proposing prison time for doctors who didn't try to save the life of a baby born during a failed abortion. It's called the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, and it failed Monday night. President Trump called the vote shocking, tweeting, "The Democrat position on abortion is so extreme that they don't mind executing babies after birth." Bill sponsor Ben Sasse, a Nebraska Republican, called out fellow senators who opposed the bill, saying, "I want to ask each and every one of my colleagues whether or not we're okay with infanticide." Well, the House of Representatives scheduled a vote to overturn President Trump's emergency declaration today. The president made a declaration to get the money he wants to build a wall on the southern border. It's the first time in history Congress has tried to undo a national emergency declaration. The measure is expected to pass the Democrat-controlled House. Well, despite the passing of founder Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews continues its mission. Hundreds of Ukrainian Jews now call Israel home thanks to an IFCJ freedom flight in Eckstein's memory. The group arrived at Ben Gurion Airport Sunday. Helping the world's Jews migrate to Israel, what's called Aliyah, is central to the group's mission. Many of them face anti-Semitism and poverty in their home countries. Eckstein's daughter, Yael, now leads the IFCJ. And Pat, I know you guys were great friends.
Dear friends, he's a wonderful man, and we mourn his passing, but it's amazing what he did and to bring communion and fellowship between Christians and Jews. He was a remarkable bridge builder, and we mourn his passing.